thank you for joining us for this Wednesday press conference. I'm Steve Fishback with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department Public Affairs Office, and today we're going to be talking about a little bit different of a topic. So often we come to these press conferences and we talk about crime trends, and a lot of it's really reactionary. But today we want to talk about an effort that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department invested in several years ago that is a proactive effort that is literally saving lives. CMPD Tactical Emergency Medical Training, or TACMED for short, is the medical specialty that involves the services and emergency medical support necessary to preserve the life of our citizens and even our officers. This training goes well beyond just regular first aid. Now, all of us that go through the academy, any law enforcement officer in the state of North Carolina, receives some very basic first responder medical training and basic law enforcement training, but TACMED goes far beyond that. Now, in that initial training, we do receive some TACMED training, but the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department has invested in creating training and implementing training on a voluntary basis to our officers that goes far beyond that. Now, why would we do that? Oftentimes, in your jurisdiction, the first responders, the first ones that will be there are your Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers. Now, there's also numerous scenes where it's just not safe to bring medic and fire in. So there's that void in treatment, perhaps. But what we've done is we've filled the gap with that. So speaking from someone who watches these videos regularly, what we're seeing are police officers, as a result of this training, able to get on scene and immediately start rendering life-saving efforts that they learned in this TACMED training. This training is most commonly associated with the military, but we found the great benefit that it can be right here on our homeland in treating folks who are suffering those same kind of injuries that we traditionally see in the military. We poured through our records and we found that there have been nearly 300 documented instances where our officers are using these materials and this training that you're about to see. All of that since we implemented this in 2020. Joining me today are two TACMED instructors who are leading the way in this training. First, I'll introduce Sergeant Brian Carey, who's going to talk to us about some of the very successful and amazing instances where we've seen the benefits of this, and he's also going to give us some background on that program. Sergeant Carey.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. I am Brian Carey. I'm a sergeant in the North Division. That's the north part of Charlotte. I've been with the department for about 24 years. I'm going on my 24th year in December. I've seen a lot of changes in Charlotte over the years. Most have been good with the Charlotte Police Department. Most have been good. This way that we're going with the TACMED training is one of the excellent things that I've seen throughout the years. So back in 2014, CMPD saw a need for officers to start doing tourniquet training. Tourniquets for many, many, many years were seen as taboo. They weren't the first thing that you would go to when somebody was suffering some kind of injury. Generally, it was direct pressure, it was elevation, a pressure point, and then they said at the very last resort, you can use a tourniquet. Times have changed. Like the lieutenant said, a lot of our program is modeled after the military model, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, TCCC, because some of the injuries that we see are the same ones that they're seeing on the battlefields in Iraq, whatever skirmishes are going on at the time. So they took data from all that and they said, hey, tourniquets are really saving lives. These pressure dressings, these chest seals that we're going to talk about in a little bit, these things are really saving lives. We need to do that sort of thing. So they first started doing tourniquets back in 2014. They taught a course at the academy. The department saw a need, said, let's do these tourniquets. It was called Surviving the First 5 Minutes. It was geared primarily toward officers, getting life-saving treatment to officers. They take a bullet to an extremity, somewhere where they can put a tourniquet on. That's what they would do. They would save their own life or save the life of a fellow officer. That was 2014. Fast forward to 2019, CMPD, again, had the great foresight to realize that we had a need for a little more advanced than just tourniquets for this wound packing for the chest seals. So they sent about 20 officers through a program, through this TACMED instructor program, put on by Broadest Defense. It's an agency that puts on these type of trainings. So 20 of us went through and became instructors to start teaching an 8-hour block of TACMED. So in 2019, actually, we held our first class in December to start getting officers through. And the way the program worked was TACMED was for senior police officers. We have a senior police officer program 1 and then a senior police officer program 2. To get senior police officer 2, TACMED was one of the requirements. Once they did that and they did a couple other things, they would get a 5% raise. So in that first year, moving over to 2020, we had about 375 officers go through. It was only officers at this time, and they all got that senior police officer 2 status. So we trained 375. That was the first year. The second year, we ramped it up a little bit. Word was spreading, hey, this is really good stuff. Third shift officers were coming to us. Officers that weren't eligible for the SPO2 program, the senior police officer program, were coming saying, hey, Sarge, how can I get involved in this? So there's 4 main instructors. There's myself, Wayne Embry, who's at the Academy, Jonathan Poplin, Sergeant, who's at the Academy, and then Officer Clark, who you meet in just a minute. So the 4 of us started trying to push it a little bit further. So if somebody came to us, we didn't have a full class, we would say, hey, come on in, we'll get you trained up, and then they would sit through the class. To date, we've trained about 1,300, not just police officers, but other employees as well. Animal control, they're oftentimes first on a scene, or not first on a scene, but they can encounter some pretty serious injuries from animals. Crime scene personnel, there's a whole slew of things that can go wrong when you're doing crime scene where you can develop serious injuries. So we started expanding a little bit more. Dignitary protection unit, the guys that go out and guard the mayor or whatever dignitaries come to town, they went through this training. Also, the CMPD puts on a command college where command leaders from other departments come here to kind of refine their leadership skills. TACMED is a small part of that as well, just because everybody's really starting to see the importance of this tactical medical class. I can speak personally about this class because to me it's not just about doing stuff here at the job, it's about doing stuff at home as well. I've got 3 kids. They're no strangers to the emergency room, unfortunately. Kids are kids, things happen. But that can go for anybody in life. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, anybody can get some kind of serious injury and not mean to. Like I said, all my kids have been to the ER. Fortunately, whatever injury they had, I could minimize the effects of that injury based on some of this training and some of the other training I've had throughout my career. So for me, this TACMED class, it moves back and forth between work life and home life. The better I am at doing this at home life, the better I am for the citizens when they need it, or my fellow officers when they need it. When TACMED first started, it was kind of under the impression that, okay, this is going to be for the mass shootings that we have. We're going to be able to go in, apply chest seals, tourniquets, all sorts of things, do casualty evacuation, that sort of thing. But it kind of morphed throughout this. It morphed into, we're using this stuff almost daily for any kind of shootings, stabbings, car wrecks, lots of different things where somebody can have an open injury and a tourniquet or one of these other implements can be applied. We're using it for those things. Like I said, we've seen tremendous impact and success of this training. In 2021, 12 officers were nominated for their life-saving measures. In every May, we have Police Week. We give out some awards. This year, 12 officers were nominated for life-saving measures using TACMED training. And 2 of those awards were given out earlier this month. The first one I'm going to go over is a group of officers were from the Westover Division, stepped to number 23rd of last year. Officers encountered a suspect or a subject who was actively trying to, had been involved in a shooting, was shooting at somebody, and then when officers tried to stop this individual, they tried to ram the officer with their car. The officer took evasive maneuvers, did whatever he could to get out of the way. Eventually, unfortunately, he had to discharge his firearm at the vehicle. He struck the driver in the chest somewhere. The driver didn't immediately succumb to any injuries, but drove away. Later, just a little bit later, the subject stopped the car, surrendered to police, and officers immediately went from police officers back to tactical medics again and began rendering life-saving support. They put chest seals on her, got her to medic, got her to the hospital into surgery, and she survived those injuries. So sometimes if we have to discharge our weapons or use some other kind of force on somebody and injury occurs, we have to switch gears. We have to then try to minimize the damage that has been done. The second one was in February of this year. It was also in Westover. Officers responded to a self-inflicted gunshot wound and found somebody that had severe injuries to the leg. So we're going to talk about a minute, in addition to the tourniquets, the wound packing. The officers did just that. They did some wound packing. They used what's called hemostatic gauze. It's got a clotting agent in it that helps the wound kind of slow down the bleeding process. They packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, got it treated. A medic or a paramedic that came said that the officers definitely saved that person's life by stopping that blood flow. The blood flow was so severe that it would have ended their life. Officers stepped in and were able to minimize that. April 1st of this year, officers responded to University City Boulevard. Again, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the hip area, to the pelvic region. There's a lot of arteries up there that can have you bleed out really quickly. Officers get there, a large pool of blood. They immediately go to work. Some officers are covering to make sure there's no additional suspects, if there are any suspects. Other officers started treating that injury. They used direct pressure, they used a pressure dressing, and they used a tourniquet, all three of those things on the same person to get this bleeding stopped. They were successful. They got that bleeding stopped. The subject was transported to the hospital. And our final example comes from just last week, 6 days ago, May 12th. Officers responded to East Trade Street for a subject that had been stabbed. He had a laceration on his wrist. The officers got there, once again, large pool of blood on the lap, comforting the victim. They said, "Hey man, we got you, we're gonna take care of you." Put a tourniquet high up on his arm, cranked it down, got the bleeding under control. One of the definitive ways that they knew they helped was when they got there, one of the people that was with him said, "Hey, he's getting really dizzy. He wasn't really thinking and talking clearly." That is an indication of blood loss, of somebody's getting ready to succumb to those injuries. When the officers put the tourniquet on, blood pressure comes back up, starts thinking clearly again, dizziness kind of goes away. They stopped that life-threatening injury, and it was evident immediately. So that's kind of what we've got with TACMED. Officer Clark is here with me as well. He's going to kind of go over some of the things that we have. This is an example of an IFAC kit, similar to what we give our officers in the Senior Police Officer 2 program. The one we give them is just a little bit smaller. This is a little bit more of an advanced one. The ones they have are a little bit smaller, but have most of the same things inside of it. I'm going to have Officer Clark. He's going to go over tourniquet, a chest seal, and some wound packing, and kind of show you what that's all about. Officer Clark.
Thank you, Sergeant Carey. As you said, my name is John Clark. I'm a police officer on 3rd Shift in the North Division, and today we're going to go over a few of the items that we give our officers to better deal with these medical emergencies. Arguably, one of the most important, but also one of the most basic tools that we provide our officers is a tourniquet. Tourniquet is used to control major life-threatening bleeding from extremities, so from arms or legs. Tourniquets have been around for hundreds of years, and in fact they look largely the same today as they did back then, because the concept is that simple but that effective. It's a tool that you will find in surgery rooms. It's used in basic surgery every day. You'll find them on ambulances that medic carry. The military has them. And in fact, you'll even see civilians using them, often with little to no previous medical training, because the concept is that easy. Unfortunately, every day, it seems we see these horrific incidents in the news, whether it's Buffalo, the New York subway attack, Boston Marathon bombing. If you look at videos and pictures of these incidents, you'll see people with belts tied around their legs, with sweatshirts tied around their arms, because the civilians intuitively understand that if they can wrap something tight enough around that limb and pinch that artery to the bone, they're going to shut blood flow down to the rest of that arm or leg, and they're going to keep the blood in the body and buy that person enough time to get to the hospital and get that life-saving medical treatment. So the tourniquet that we provide our officers is called the Combat Application Tourniquet, or the CAT tourniquet. I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and as you can see and hear, the first part of this anatomy is a long Velcro strap. Okay. At the top of this Velcro strap, we have what we affectionately call the hardware. You've got a stick with a little bit of fabric that runs through it, and you've got a C-clip that's going to act as a lock for the stick. And you'll see why this is important in a second, but there's a little bit of fabric that runs through the stick and is embedded in this strap. So effectively, when I apply this as tight as possible to a victim, I will then use the stick, turn it, and make it that much tighter. So Sergeant Carey would join me?
Sure.
So if he has a life-threatening bleed to his left arm, I need to use a tourniquet to stop that bleeding and, again, buy him time. So I'll simply put the strap through the buckle, create a bit of a lasso, and I'm going to put it up between his shoulder and his bicep in this natural muscle valley. And again, I'm going to get this as tight as possible on the first try. I'm going to get the Velcro all the way around. Now that's as tight as I could pull it. But is it tight enough to stop the bleeding? Not necessarily. That's where this stick comes in. I'm going to tighten this stick down, turn this stick over and over until I can stop that major life-threatening bleed from that arm. Probably get a grimace from Sergeant Carey here in a second.
Yes, it's hurting quite bad already.
Yeah. So once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and secure the stick by putting it in this C-clip. I'm locking it into place. And then I'm going to secure the strap. Get it out of the way so that it doesn't come undone. I'm going to put this little Velcro strip across the top of it, and the tourniquet has now been applied. Okay, so this life-threatening bleed has been stopped. Now, not only have I bought him time to get to the hospital to get that advanced life-saving treatment, but depending on the injury, I have now given him function back to his arm. So if this is another officer on a scene and he's been injured, I've stopped this bleeding, I've saved his life and bought him time, but now he can move this. He can pick things up. He can help other people. He can help himself. So it's really a great tool. It's going to be the same application on a leg. But again, a tourniquet is what we're going to use to stop that major life-threatening bleed. So probably the second most frequently used tool that we use in these toolkits is called a chest seal. Now, Sergeant Carey, I'll bring you back up. If Sergeant Carey were to sustain an injury on his chest deep enough to allow basically air to pass through the outside into his chest, eventually that lung is going to collapse. He's not going to be able to breathe. So this is a pretty simple maneuver. We're going to open this up. So this is what a chest seal looks like. It's really simple. It's just a big sticky sticker, for lack of a better word. It's just something that will stop airflow. Okay. So this has a plastic backer for the purpose of not messing up his nice shirt. I won't peel the backer off. I won't use the sticky part right now. But let's say he has an injury right here that's allowing air in. I'm just going to take the sticker, apply it over that, directly over the hole. So now airflow is no longer getting into his chest. He's able to breathe, and he's able to help himself and help other people again.
Just real quick, one thing to note, I am wearing a vest right now. This would go directly on my skin. It wouldn't go on my outer clothing. He would peel my vest away, peel my shirt away, put that directly on my skin. With a vest, this will stop some rounds, but high-powered rifle rounds, it's not going to stop. So this chest seal would be necessary for police officers too in that situation, but directly on the skin.
So the next tool that I will talk about, and the last tool, is wound packing. And Sergeant Carey has already mentioned an instance where wound packing has saved someone's life that we've used on the job. So let's say Sergeant Carey has sustained an injury and it's a life-threatening bleed, but it's in a place that's too high for a tourniquet, right? So tourniquet we're using on extremities, arms and legs, but let's say he takes an injury to the shoulder, okay? I can't get a tourniquet up that high. I'm gonna pack this wound cavity with as much gauze as possible. I'm trying to create as much pressure inside of that wound cavity. The analogy we like to use is basically you take a hose and you're plugging the hose with your thumb. You're stopping the water from coming out. It's that easy. So we're gonna take gauze, as much gauze as it takes. And just for the purpose of this demonstration, just imagine I have a wound right here, right? So imagine I've created a little wound cavity. I'm just gonna pack it with as much gauze as possible. Again, creating as much pressure inside that wound cavity as possible to stop any blood from coming out of that open artery. Again, this is a training that we're all very excited about. Sergeant Carey briefly touched on it. It's not just making us better officers, it's making us better brothers, better sisters, better children, better parents, and better neighbors. We're not always in uniform, but we do have normal lives, and we are out there with civilians every single day in some capacity. In taking this training, we're able to not just respond as an officer, but as a civilian and as your neighbor.
And we're going to open it up to questions here in just a second, but to our media partners, let's keep those questions specific to the topic at hand. And also keep in mind that following this press conference, we are going to be sending a lot of this information in written form to you, as well as some B-roll footage of this training actually going on at the CMPD Academy. So at this point, any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about, it seems like you guys have been doing this training for a little bit now, so why are we talking about it specifically today?
Well, it actually took us a long while to get this press conference together and to try to get this data together for this. I would consider this an evergreen topic. Unfortunately, violent crime has led to a number of shootings in our jurisdiction, but I think we can all agree that it's not stopping in isolated instances, as well as, we only have to look, unfortunately, at the last week and see these instances that result in mass casualties. So I think we could do this press conference again next year and highlight probably additional employees we've trained and additional tactics that we've implemented on it.
After you've seen the success of this program and you have, I guess, 1,300 officers and employees trained, is this something that maybe you would consider making every recruit go through as a part of their, training?
Yes, the goal is to provide this training to every officer and employee with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. That's how valuable that we have seen this training be. Again, I get a lot of these videos sent to me, body-worn camera footage videos, and the life-saving efforts are absolutely amazing. I'm watching a group of police officers, and if they weren't wearing this uniform, you would think that they were doctors in an emergency room. I mean, that's how impressive it is. It's unbelievable.
And it seems like, this would be, almost, I wouldn't say common sense, but, for police officers that are responding to a scene, why do you think it's taken so long to get this training to police officers, not only here, but across the country?
Sure, and I can't speak about other departments, but as Sergeant Carey spoke about earlier, there's been a lot of changes and improvements in law enforcement and to recognize the need for this. For so long, it was compartmentalized, where the police, medic, fire, but then people like Sergeant Carey, who identified that need and realized, hey, there's a lot more that we can be doing. I mean, really, if you think about how forward-thinking that is, to say we're going to take police officers, so much is already asked of them, and now we're going to make them TAC meds as well. And from here, we only see more of our employees being trained up and additional training being provided to them.
Is that a difficult position to be in when you've had someone who has physically tried to attack you as an officer, and then you have to turn around and put on, kind of the medic hat and treat them as, a person.
Sure, and I appreciate you recognizing that fact of that's what we ask. That's what society asks of our police officers. Can you think of that? Someone just tried to kill you. You had to use force to protect yourself, and now you're going from that adversarial type contact to now you're their caretaker and saving their life. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to expect of a human being, right? But that's something that we ask of our Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers every day, and they do it.
And what would you say is kind of the amount of time that you maybe save between when police officers get to the scene sometimes and when medics arrive?
I'm going to bring Sergeant Carey up here for that question. Sergeant.
Thank you, sorry. So often, like he said, police officers are the very first ones there. And you asked how much time are we saving by doing this? It could be minutes, or it could be seconds, or it could be number of minutes. It depends where in Mecklenburg County you are. If you're, like I'm in North Division, Officer Clark and I are in North Division, there's times when we're there 5, 10, 15 minutes before medic gets there. So there could be a huge delay in that time before a little more advanced medical care gets there. Or, and this has happened several times, the police officers will be there, they'll be using one of these life-saving implements, and fire will come up, they're EMT level care providers, they will come up, see the work that we're doing, and basically kind of monitor what we're doing. They don't necessarily jump right in because they're going to do exactly what we're doing. So they kind of stand back, they'll get their oxygen bottle, whatever else that we might not have access to. They'll start prepping that gear to use on the person. But a lot of times we'll just run with it until it's to that point, or then medic gets here and they start their definitive care.
Other questions for the sergeant?
Some of these life-saving techniques, it's not exactly rocket science. Do you have any thing you want to say to the community? You guys talk about saving seconds or minutes sometimes. When you get on scene, you could be the first person to provide care yourself as well if you're willing to take it on, correct?
Absolutely. And we do see that quite frequently. One thing that medic does, and this kind of speaks to CPR more than it does the TAC med stuff. When people generally see somebody that has collapsed or fallen out for whatever reason, maybe a heart attack or choking or whatever, it's not a shock to the system like a large pool of blood. So medic can talk somebody through CPR on the phone. Okay, put your hands here, do this number of compressions. They do that all the time. People are very willing to get in there, especially on loved ones, and start doing CPR. This type of emergency medicine's a little bit different because when you do see that large pool of blood, you kind of people can go into a tunnel vision, just not really knowing what to do. Okay, I can put my hand there, I can, try to stop the bleeding, and we do get that quite a bit. What I would say to those people, the community members that, would like to participate in these things, is there's the American Heart Association, American Red Cross, they all put on basic first aid classes, and I would say take that. There's a huge initiative across the United States called Stop the Bleed, and it deals exactly with this stuff, direct pressure, getting something over top of the wound, trying to minimize that bleeding as soon as you can. I think if people can just get past the visceral reaction that comes from seeing either a loved one seriously injured or a large, just a gruesome scene, then we can further address that.
Other questions? Okay, again, this is training that is not required by the state of North Carolina. This is a product of people like Sergeant Brian Carey and Officer John Clark, who are forward-thinking, took the initiative, realized a need for our Charlotte-Mecklenburg citizens and officers, stepped in, stepped up, and have made some miraculous things happen on that end. So again, from here, we only see more employees getting trained and additional tactics within that training being offered. Thank you for joining us. For those our media partners that are here with us today, I'll be hanging around for us to follow up on certain situations, and then also be on the lookout in your inboxes as we send out some B-roll footage for you as well as some written material for it. Thank you.